Good morning, team. Dustin Jones here. Today, we're going to talk about some clinical tips to increase physical activity levels in our patients. Going to talk about some of the research, also use a case example that went well and that also went poorly. But this is a big, big topic that has really big implications for the health of our patients. And I feel like, especially in the realm of physical therapy, it's something that we are not addressing or discussing enough. Um, Within our world, right? Within the realm of the Institute of Clinical Excellence, right? You're watching this in the app or you're listening to it on a podcast feed. You are likely a fitness forward professional. You are likely, I'm making some assumptions here, but regularly participating in exercise, maybe some type of routine. Maybe you're a part of a gym. You're probably regularly lifting weights. You're a very active individual. For people like us, when we talk about physical activity, what can often come to mind is exercise, CrossFit, you know, uh, functional fitness, doing whatever your brand of fitness is. That is what we typically think about. I want you to break away from that assumption because I think that can ultimately be harmful when we're working with older adults. Hear me out here. All right. When you are working with many older adults who, by and large, do not have a lot of experience with exercise, it is very easy for us, the fitness forward clinicians, to discount the benefit of increasing overall physical activity levels when it doesn't look like what we do, right? When they aren't lifting heavy or not doing AMRAPs, EMOMs, barbell cycling, so on and so forth, right? So when you hear physical activity, I just want you to think about movement. And if we can increase those levels and increase movement, especially in older adults that demonstrate sedentary and physical inactivity behaviors, low physical activity behaviors, we can make a significant change. Here's how it plays out in my head, and you may feel this as well, right? As I'm exercising 5 to 6 times a day, right? I'm hitting high intensities. It can be easy for me to think of, the recommendation of standing up every 30 minutes to a patient that I'm working with as ineffective or simple or kind of silly, right? But in the grand scheme of things, those are impactful. The way we like to think about physical activity in the older adult division is we view this as a spectrum, not a destination, but a spectrum. That spectrum can range from sedentary behaviors to physical inactivity, which is categorized as physical activity that does not meet the recommended amount of 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity physical activity or 75 minutes a week of vigorous intensity activity and 2 times a week of strength training. Folks that are hitting those levels are considered to be physically active. And so don't hear me wrong here. I want everyone I work with to be hitting those physical activity levels. However, there's a lot of folks where that is a long ways away or it may never be in the cards. And we need to actually see the value in getting someone that is relatively sedentary to reduce their sedentarism, even by a little bit, or to transition them into being physically inactive, which is progress, right? I think we bring a lot of bias into this conversation. We need to check our bias when we're working with actual people. All right. So let's go through kind of an initial encounter that of some things that you want to be thinking about when you're trying to just increase physical activity levels, because we know the benefit is so tremendous in terms of rates of different chronic conditions, of them maintaining independence. Risk of all cause mortality goes down as well as we get people active. So what does the first session look like? All right. So when we're meeting that person, we're going through our subjective, and it's not that different, right, from any other evaluation. But what I'm really, really trying to learn is, what does this person want to be able to do that they cannot do right now? Usually, what I'm using is the patient specific function scale, the PSFS. And I'll drop in the app under this video, I'll drop PDFs and links to everything I'm going to reference. So, this PSFS, they're going to tell you how challenging it is to do something And it's very open ended, which shows you that it's on their mind, right? It's something that they care about. And it's usually something function related. That is an absolute gold mine for exercise prescription in general, but definitely from increasing physical activity levels. Because you can you identify how limiting something can be, a barrier that you really want to address, but then you also get an idea of an activity or capacity that someone really, really values. And if they value it, we want to work that into our recommendations. So the PSFS, I would make sure that you're familiar with that and start using that. Within these conversations as well, I want to get a really good idea of their fears and their confidence. When we look at physical activity levels in older adults, someone's level of fear, like fear of falling, is going to be a major contributing factor to them moving a lot or moving very little. And so if there's a lot of fear on board, and or they have low confidence in some very fundamental capacities, I want to know about that, because I can do all the exercises in the world, and if I'm not influencing their perceived confidence, then they may not actually change their activity levels. When we go to influence confidence and reduce fear, a lot of that is going to be through graded exposure, where we are showing them what they're truly capable of doing and how they're able to handle these different scenarios. So I want to get a good idea of that. Usually it's through conversations, and I'm digging in, asking a lot of why questions. But we also have some really helpful subjective questionnaires like the Falls Efficacy Scale, like the ABC or Activities Balance Confidence Scale that you can give someone, and it's going to list their level of fear, level of confidence with a whole host of different functional activities. This is going to be an absolute gold mine for exercises that you want to do, but then also the avenue that you want to take to increase physical activity levels. In the subjective part as well, and this may not be on day one, because some of these conversations I would say are sensitive, and I may want to build a little more rapport with that person before asking all of these things on day one. But I'm really trying to get an idea of any barriers to them moving more, which is not just physical, right? Are there social or relational barriers, right? Do they have ample social support? What are their financial resources, right? Do they have the means to be able to do things that they want to be able to do, right? Are there literal physical or environmental limitations that are influencing these people so they can't get out and move, right? I'm assessing these psychosocial variables to see if that is a major barrier to them actually increasing their physical activity levels. Usually not day one. That is after you've built the trust and rapport. So I would say that is a leading variable. Save that, park it, but no, that can be a huge, huge factor. Where in different settings, I think it's going to play different roles, right? Like if you're a home health clinician and you don't have those psychosocial variables on board and are aware of them, you may not be as effective as a clinician when you're not addressing some of those variables, because they can have huge implications in terms of your outcomes. So you want to be very aware of these and get a good idea. So through the subjective, you're getting in a good idea of their patient-centered goals, their desires. PSFS is a great opportunity to or tool to use. You want to have an accurate understanding of their fear and confidence in different activities. That could be a conversation, or you could use that FES or the ABC scale. And then you want to identify some of those psychosocial barriers that can influence physical activity levels. So that's what I'm gathering kind of in that subjective piece. Then as we go into the objective portion of the assessment, and for many of the outpatient clinicians that may be on this call right now or watching or listening later, right? The vast majority of folks are coming to you because of their pain, right? And so most of the time, pain, especially in outpatient orthopedics, is going to be a major limiting variable in them increasing their physical activity levels. And we obviously want to address it. All right. So that needs to be stated, but it's the obvious thing, right? So address their pain, right? Lower those symptoms, increase their capacity before those symptoms start to elevate, right? Do your thing. But I also want to acknowledge when you're in your objective piece, when you're looking at their physical function, right? What are they capable of doing? Which you may not get a good understanding of if pain is very, very high or they're rather irritable. I want you to have a good idea of what they're capable of doing And I also want you to think of how you may be able to assist them. This is where I've really changed my tune over the years, where I used to be very negative towards compensatory strategies, right? Like if someone may have been like supervision, in their ambulation throughout the home, I would usually be very hesitant to recommend something like a single point cane or a rollator, for example. I kind of viewed assistive devices, so on and so forth, as a crutch, right? That they would become more dependent on and would lead to further, physical decline. And I think that still happens in a lot of cases, right? But I do acknowledge the window that that can create to increase someone's mobility and independence, right? If someone is fearful of falling, and they may be supervision in their ambulation, and I can give them a single point cane or even some hiking poles, right? And then they get the confidence to be able to walk out their door and go on a walk or go get their mail, right? That is a significant impact in that person's life, in the activity that they're getting, right? And their confidence. And so in those scenarios, I am looking for ways to compensate if I know that I can likely increase their physical activity levels and movement by the help of that assistive device. I'm also thinking about maybe environmental modifications as well. If you're in the home, maybe moving a piece of furniture to allow for a more convenient handhold. Do they need grab bars somewhere? Thinking along those lines to increase their confidence and their safety and their willingness to be able to get up and move. All right. So just be very aware of that. I've definitely had to check my bias over the years. I'm definitely pro compensatory strategies if I can get people moving sooner rather than later. So now, as we get a good idea from the subjective piece and the objective piece, then we want to create a plan. And this is where I want to share a couple instances where I've got it right and where I've got it really, really wrong. Both of these are in the context of the home setting. So going in, working with them in home health, part A, not part B. So it takes a considerable and taxing effort for them to leave the home. And there's one individual, and this person, they were coming pretty close to discharge. They were improving in terms of their ambulatory independence, in terms of their balance. They were starting to walk out of their house. It was still a considerable and taxing effort, but they were getting to the point where they were starting to go to their driveway or the end of their driveway and get their mail, which was huge for them. They had previously been walking pretty regularly in their little cul-de-sac. She would do like laps in their cul-de-sac. And so she wanted to get back to that. Well, me being, up on the latest physical activity literature and, the importance of stepping, right? I was like, oh my gosh, all right. She loves to walk. Let's set a step count goal. All right. And so what I did is, at the time, the most recent, number that was out was 10,000 steps per day. Now, keep in mind, this person was homebound. They were not tracking their steps, so they had no idea what they were actually stepping. Didn't really have a good idea of what they were stepping per day previously when they were doing those laps around the cul-de-sac. And so in my mind, it's like, all right, let's get to 10,000 steps per day. So this person was not even tracking their steps. So I recommended a device, a Fitbit, very kind of low end Fitbit that they purchased. They had some funds, they bought it, and then I set a 10,000 step count per day goal right out the gate, right? So I made in that scenario, and you can only imagine what happened, right? They, I gave them that plan. The next day, she got maybe 2,000 steps per day. I set 10,000 as the goal. How do you think she felt, right? Before that, she was even struggling to be able to read the step number, right? It created more harm than good. The first mistake I made was a very unreasonable goal based on her current situation, right? I did not give her an attainable goal for her to get early wins and successes to build her confidence. I also added a layer of complexity of a new device, a new piece of equipment or tracking device that she was not familiar with. She'd never counted her steps before. And this was all new, novel, and very frustrating for her because she had a difficult time navigating that Fitbit screen that is so, so small. So I really set her up for failure. In the follow up visit at that time, my frequency with her was one time per week. by the time I came back, you can only imagine how frustrated she was. And ultimately, I think her step count probably went down because I created this scenario where she was so defeated. And at the time, I really perceived that if you're not getting that 10,000 steps, what's the point? Right. So fast forward, step count literature has evolved, right, and have a more accurate understanding of what's really going on as we increase physical activity levels through stepping. So I had a patient, very similar situation where we're nearing discharge. She's going in and out of her home a little bit easier, getting her mail. She was also avid walker prior. She was also tracking her steps, right? So that lends itself, boom. We know a step count goal. A is going to be familiar with her. She's used to tracking it and she has that same device. Awesome. Previously, she was getting over 10,000 steps per day, and that was her goal. She had experienced a lot of decline to where 10,000 was not going to be achievable for her, especially right now. And so instead of giving her this big, lofty goal, I gave her a goal of 2,000 steps per day. Previously, I would have thought that's an absolute waste of time. I remember at the beginning of this episode, and those that tuned in late, go back and watch that because we have to reframe how we think about physical activity, right? It is a spectrum, it's not a destination. It is not CrossFit, it is not functional fitness, it is not AMRAPs and EMOMs per se. Physical activity is getting people moving, and we're working with these folks. We need to get them moving in whatever way they're going to be willing to do, right? And so 2,000 steps, very achievable. She hit the goal. Awesome. Bump it up. 4,000 steps per day. Boom. Hits the goal, gets success. She's feeling good. She's getting close to her old route. All right, let's add 2,000 more and incrementally increase that as she built confidence and got to over 10,000. Now, that is more effective from the behavioral health standpoint, right? Making meaning or reasonable goals. But I want to share some research with you that also shows that has significant influence in these people's lives. And I'll drop the link to this study in the comments. But as we look at step count, for example, and I'm using step count around the physical activity conversation because it is very, I think it's a very easy goal to implement with a lot of folks and very familiar. And a lot of people can track it. If they don't have a wearable, they have a phone, right, that they can use. But for folks that are sedentary and we're increasing their step count, they actually get more relative benefit in those smaller jumps as opposed to the bigger jumps. I'm going to give you some stats here. I'm going to read these out, but these are pretty eye opening. So, this study looked at the rates of all cause mortality, so death from all causes, and how those rates were influenced by people's step counts. And these people were sedentary, and then they increased their step count by various degrees. So if you're sedentary and you go up 4,000 steps per day, you have reduced your all-cause mortality risk by 25%. Dang, pretty significant, right? If you get that up to 7,000 per day, that risk of from all-cause mortality drops by 47%. So sedentary to 4,000, 25% reduction. 4,000 to 7,000, 47% reduction. These are very significant jumps in relatively low step counts, which gives us even more incentive to use maybe some of these lower goal numbers. Then when we get to 10,000 steps per day, it reduces by 53%. So at 7,000 steps per day, it was 47% reduction. At 10,000 steps per day is 53%. 6% difference when we added 3,000 steps. Now, I'm not saying don't try and get to 10,000, right? More is better, but the impact starts to level off. When we get to 12,500 steps, that reduction is 65%. So it continues to go up, right? But the impact relatively is very significant in that 4 to 7,000 step range. And for me, my gosh, am I glad to hear that. I can confidently give that 4,000 step per day goal, knowing that we're going to have some significant impact. If they're sedentary, I'm reducing their all cause mortality risk by 25%. And man, if we can get up to that 7,000 step per day count, I'm reducing their all cause mortality risk by 47%. These are very significant numbers for these folks and very achievable step counts. So I want you to take this information as you go and prescribe some of your home exercise programs, you're trying to increase physical activity levels. These relatively quote unquote smaller numbers are very, very significant. I wish I would have known that with that first patient I worked with, because I probably could have changed those outcomes pretty significantly. All right, so let me know your all thoughts. If you all have any other tips, tricks related to increasing physical activity levels, I would love to hear. I know we have a variety of folks that are watching right now, some home healthers. What's up, Anushka? Some folks in outpatient, some folks in SNF. I think we all have our different tips and tricks to increase activity in those particular settings. You can just drop it in the comments of this video, as other folks are going to come and check them out as well. I will post the links to the outcome measures I mentioned, and then also the study that looked at the all cause mortality rates based on step count. All right, thanks for hanging out with me all on this lovely Wednesday. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.